The cafe was quiet in that slow afternoon way. When the lunch crowd had already gone and the dinner rush was still far off, soft music played in the background, almost unnoticed. Sunlight slipped in through the wide front windows and rested on the wooden floor, warming the room just enough to feel comfortable. It was the kind of place people came to think, to rest, or to hide for a while. A man sat alone at a corner table near the window. He looked calm, but his table was covered with papers, a tablet, and a small notebook filled with numbers. His jacket was expensive, neatly folded over the back of his chair. He had the posture of someone used to being listened to. Every few minutes, he tapped his pen on the table, staring at the numbers as if they owed him an explanation. Across the room, the waitress moved from table to table with steady steps. She was used to quiet afternoons like this. They gave her time to breathe. She carried trays, wiped tables, refilled cups, and smiled when needed. To most people, she was just doing her job. Nothing about her seemed unusual. She wore a clean apron, her hair tied back, her face calm but tired in a familiar way. She noticed the man as soon as he walked in earlier, not because of his clothes or his confidence, but because of the way he studied everything around him. He didn't scroll on his phone like most customers. He watched the room, the menu, even the prices written on the board, as if everything had meaning. When she first came to take his order, he barely looked up. He asked for coffee and something light, his voice polite but distracted. She nodded, wrote it down, and walked away. As she moved back toward the counter, she glanced once more at his table and saw the papers filled with figures. Numbers always caught her eye, the way music caught other people's ears. Minutes later, she returned with his coffee. This time, he thanked her and took a sip, still focused on the documents. She waited a moment in case he needed anything else. He didn't. She turned to leave. Time passed slowly. The man crossed out lines, rewrote numbers, leaned back, then leaned forward again. His pen paused often, hovering above the page like he was unsure where to land. At some point, he let out a soft laugh, shaking his head at the paper. When the waitress came by to check on him again, he looked up and smiled, finally present in the moment. He nodded toward the papers and said, half joking, money looks simple until it's not. One wrong number, and suddenly you need another cup of coffee just to survive. It was the kind of joke people with money made without thinking. Light, careless, harmless. The waitress smiled politely, the way she always did. But her eyes flicked down to the open notebook without effort, without meaning to. Something didn't sit right. The man laughed again, expecting nothing more than a polite response. I swear numbers change when you're not looking, he added. She gave a small nod and said, They usually don't. We just miss them sometimes. He raised an eyebrow, amused. Fair enough. She started to step away, but her eyes stayed on the page for a second longer than she meant to. One column of numbers stood out. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't even hidden. It was just wrong. She stopped walking. For a moment, she argued with herself. It wasn't her business. Customers didn't come to cafes to be corrected by waitresses, especially about things far beyond the menu. She had learned long ago to stay invisible when needed. It made life easier. Still, something pulled at her. Not pride. Not a need to prove anything. Just the simple discomfort of seeing a mistake and walking away from it. She turned back. I'm sorry, she said gently. I don't mean to interrupt. The man looked up, surprised. Yes, she pointed carefully, not touching the paper. That total there. I think it's off. There was silence between them, thick and awkward. He blinked, then smiled politely. The kind of smile people use when they think someone is confused. He glanced down at the page and let out a soft chuckle. It's a bit complicated, he said kindly. Easy to misread. She nodded. I understand. But I don't think it's a misread. I think that figure was added twice. His smile froze, just for a second. He looked down again, slower this time, then back up at her. His tone stayed light, but something sharper hid beneath it. You sure about that? She hesitated. This was the moment she could back away, apologize, and disappear. She had done that her whole life. Instead, she took a breath. Yes. He leaned back and crossed his arms, studying her now instead of the paper. All right, he said, curiosity creeping in. Show me. She didn't reach for the notebook. She explained it aloud, step by step, pointing to the numbers as she spoke. Her voice stayed calm, steady. She didn't rush. She didn't use fancy terms. Just simple logic. As she spoke, his expression changed. The amused confidence slowly faded, replaced by focus. When she finished, the cafe felt even quieter than before. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, checking the figures himself. One line, then another. He erased something, rewrote it, and paused. He laughed again, but this time it wasn't careless. It was short and thoughtful. Well, he said quietly, that's embarrassing. She smiled softly, a little relieved. It happens, she said. He looked up at her. Really looked this time. How did you spot that so quickly? She shrugged. Habit, I guess. From where? She hesitated again. I like numbers. He waited, expecting more. I study them in my free time, she added. I read, practice, finance. He asked, surprised. Whatever I can get access to. She replied honestly. He shook his head slowly, a small smile forming. That joke I made earlier. I guess it wasn't much of a joke after all. She didn't respond, unsure what to say. He gestured to the chair across from him without thinking. Do you have a minute? She glanced toward the counter. The cafe was still calm. No one needed her right then. Yes, she said. She sat in that simple moment. Two very different worlds touched at a small cafe table. Neither of them knew it yet, but something important had begun. All because of a joke that wasn't meant to matter and a mistake that couldn't be ignored. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, feeling suddenly aware of how quiet the cafe had become. The chair felt a little too stiff, the table a little too small for what had just happened. She was used to standing while people spoke to her, not sitting face to face with them like this. The man studied the notebook again. He didn't rush. He checked the numbers the way someone checks a locked door twice, slowly and with care. Then he looked up at her. You're right, he said. That changes everything. She gave a small nod, unsure how to respond. To her, it wasn't a big moment. It was just a mistake fixed. Still, something in his voice told her it mattered more to him. He closed the notebook and slid it aside. I didn't even notice it, he said, almost to himself. I've been staring at these numbers all day. That happens too, she said calmly. When you're too close to something, he smiled. Most people wouldn't point it out. Most people don't look, she replied. He laughed softly at that, not in amusement this time, but in recognition. So, tell me, he said, leaning forward, resting his arms on the table. How does a waitress end up spotting financial errors? She glanced toward the counter again, as if expecting someone to call her name. No one did. She took a breath. It's nothing special, she said. I just learned from where? Anywhere I could. Old books. Free courses. Papers people throw away. He raised an eyebrow. People throw away a lot, he said. They do, she agreed. You'd be surprised what ends up in the trash. He looked at her differently now. Not like a customer looks at staff, but like a student studies something unfamiliar. So you study finance? He asked. I study patterns, she said. Money is just part of that. That answer made him pause. She continued, feeling more confident as the words came. Numbers tell stories. When something doesn't fit, it shows. He tapped the table once. All right, he said. Let's see how far that goes. He pulled the notebook back and flipped to another page. If you don't mind, he added quickly. No pressure. Just curiosity. I don't mind, she said. He pointed to a section filled with smaller figures. What do you think of this forecast? She leaned slightly forward, careful not to touch anything. She scanned it quietly for a moment. Her eyes moved fast, but her face stayed relaxed. The growth assumption is aggressive, she said. He blinked. Why? Because the cost adjustment doesn't match it, she said. You're expecting the market to expand, but you're holding expenses to steady. That doesn't usually happen. He sat back again. She felt a familiar twist in her stomach. This was usually where people smiled politely and changed the subject. This was where she was expected to be wrong. Instead, he asked, "What would you change?" That surprised her. She answered honestly, "I'd slow the projection and test it against a shorter cycle first. See what breaks." He nodded slowly. "That's exactly what my team said last week." She looked up, startled. "Then why didn't you listen?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. For a second, she thought she had gone too far. She opened her mouth to apologize, but he laughed. A real laugh this time. "That's a good question," he said. "Ego, maybe." She smiled faintly. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a car passed. Inside, the coffee machine hummed softly. "So," he said at last, "what are you doing here?" She knew what he meant. "Working," she replied. "No," he said gently. "I mean long term." She hesitated. No one had asked her that in a long time. "Not seriously. I want to be trusted with decisions," she said. "Not just tasks." He nodded, understanding more than he let on. "You don't sound like someone who wants sympathy," he said. "You sound like someone who wants room." "Yes," she said simply. He glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting soon," he said. "But I don't want to forget this conversation." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, then paused. "Before I give this to you," he said, "I need to ask something." She waited. "Why speak up today?" She thought about it. "Because mistakes grow when no one corrects them," she said. "And because jokes about money are easy when you don't feel the cost of being wrong." It landed harder than she expected. He looked at her with new respect. "Fair," he said. He slid the card across the table. "If you want," he said carefully, "send me an email. Not a job application. Just thoughts, observations, anything you'd fix." She stared at the card. She had seen cards like this before, usually passed without meaning. "And if I don't?" she asked. "Then this stays a good conversation," he said. "Nothing more." She liked that answer. She picked up the card. "I'll think about it," she said. He stood gathering his things. "Do," he replied. "People who notice what others miss shouldn't stay silent too long." As he walked toward the door, he stopped and turned back. "For what it's worth," he added, "that wasn't a small correction you made earlier. It saved me from a very public mistake." She nodded. "You're welcome." The door closed behind him. She remained seated for a moment, the card warm in her hand. Around her, the cafe returned to normal. Cups clinked. A customer called for a refill. Life moved on, as if nothing had happened. But she knew better. Something had shifted. Not outside. Inside, she stood, tucked the card safely into her apron, and went back to work. Yet every step felt lighter, every sound sharper. The joke about money still echoed in her mind. But now it felt different, not careless. Awakening. The rest of the day passed, but it didn't really move the way it usually did for her. She served customers, wiped tables, took orders, and smiled when needed, yet her mind stayed somewhere else. The business card felt heavier than paper should. Every time she moved, she was aware of it sitting safely in her apron that night. After the cafe closed and the chairs were stacked, she walked home instead of taking the bus. The air was cool, and the streets were quieter than usual. Walking helped her think. It always had at home. She placed the card on the small table near her bed and stared at it for a long time. She didn't touch her phone. She didn't turn on the television. She just sat and replayed the conversation again and again. The tone of his voice, the way his posture changed. The respect that slowly replaced surprise. She had met people like him before. Not exactly him, but people who talked big and offered chances that never came. That was why she hadn't handed over her excitement easily. Hope, she had learned, needed proof. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Before work, she opened her old notebook, the one filled with rough notes, sketches of ideas, numbers written in the margins. She didn't plan anything fancy. She just wrote honestly. What she noticed, what she would improve, what felt fragile in the way businesses trusted shortcuts. It took her hours. She wrote slowly, erased often, rewrote again. By the time the sun moved higher in the sky, she had to clean pages. She held them in her hands and felt a mix of fear and calm. Later that evening, after another long shift, she found a quiet moment and typed the thoughts into an email. She read it 3 times. The language was simple. The points were clear. No begging. No introduction about her life, just ideas. Then she sent it. She didn't tell anyone. Not her coworkers, not her family. It felt safer that way. If nothing came of it, no one else needed to know. 2 days passed. Then 3, she expected silence. Silence was familiar. On the 4th day, during a slow hour, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, then froze. It was a reply. The message was short, polite, direct. He thanked her for the note, said he had shared it with someone else, asked if she would be open to meeting for coffee. Her first reaction was disbelief. Her second was fear. She closed her eyes for a second. This was real now. Real meant risk. She replied simply, yes. They met at the same cafe, early in the morning before her shift. He arrived casually dressed this time. No jacket, no papers spread out. Just a notebook and a calm expression. I read everything, he said after they sat down. Twice. She waited. You don't think like someone who memorized rules, he continued. You think like someone who understands consequences. She nodded, unsure what to say. He slid a folder across the table. These are anonymized figures from a real situation, he said. No pressure. Look through them when you can. Tell me what stands out. She opened the folder carefully. The numbers were familiar in their complexity, familiar in their mistakes. I'll take my time, she said. That's what I want, he replied. Over the next week, this became their rhythm. He sent data. She studied after work, late into the night. Not out of obligation, but interest. She sent back notes, sometimes short, sometimes detailed. He asked questions. Not to test her, but to understand how she thought. One evening he called. That surprised her. You saved us again, he said without greeting. From what? She asked. From assuming the market would forgive hesitation, he replied. She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Slowly, without ceremony, her input became expected. Not extraordinary, just part of the process. But not everyone welcomed it. During one meeting, she joined remotely. Someone questioned her presence, asked what her role was. She answered honestly. I don't have a title. The room went quiet. Later, he checked in with her. You handled that well, he said. I'm used to not fitting, she replied. That will change, he said. But it will be uncomfortable first. She believed him. Still, doubt showed up on quiet nights. Nights when exhaustion pressed heavier than hope. Nights when she wondered if this was just another temporary window. Then came the message that shifted everything. He asked her to review a proposal before it went public. The stakes were higher. The room larger. The silence louder. She read carefully, slowly. There it was again. Not a math error this time, but an assumption that could cost people jobs. It failed. She hesitated before responding. Then she spoke. She explained the risk. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just clearly. The reply came quickly. We're stopping, he wrote. Because of you. She sat back, heart racing. That night, she barely slept the following week. He asked her a question that stopped her completely. What would it take for you to do this without rushing back to serve tables? She looked around the cafe during her shift after reading the message. The familiar sounds. The familiar walls. I don't want favors, she typed back. I want responsibility. His response came later. Then let's talk about responsibility. She folded her apron that night with care. She wasn't leaving yet. Not officially, but she knew she was standing at the edge of something new, and all because she had refused to let a small joke stay wrong. The change did not arrive loudly. It came quietly, through emails and short calls that slowly filled more of her days. She still worked her shifts at the cafe, tying her apron the same way every morning, but her thoughts were different now. Between customers, she caught herself thinking about projections, risks, and questions that had no simple answers. She had agreed to review one project more closely, just one to see how it felt. When the files arrived, she realized quickly that this was no test. This was real. People were attached to these numbers. Real jobs, real reputations. She cleared her small table at home and spread everything out. Papers on one side, notebook on the other. She read slowly, forcing herself not to rush. That was her rule. Rushed decisions were expensive. What she found made her uneasy. The plan looked strong on the surface. It's polished and confident. But underneath, it relied too heavily on best-case outcomes. Too much hope. Not enough protection. She wrote down questions instead of answers. What if demand dipped? What if costs rose at the same time? What if timing slipped by just a few weeks? The more she tested it, the more fragile it became. When she shared her concerns, the response was not immediate. Hours passed. Then a message came asking her to join a virtual meeting. When she logged in, she saw faces she didn't recognize. People who spoke quickly, confidently, people who were used to leading rooms. She listened at first, letting them finish. Her heart beat faster than she wanted it to. She reminded herself to focus on the work, not the room. When she finally spoke, she did not attack the plan. She explained scenarios, calmly, slowly. She showed where small shifts could turn into large losses. Some faces tightened. Others looked at their screens. One voice pushed back, said her concerns were unlikely. Too cautious, she answered simply. Unlikely events cause the most damage, she said. Because no one plans for them? The room went quiet. After the call ended, she sat still, unsure if she had done too much or not enough. Later that night, her phone rang. They're not happy, he said. She breathed out. I figured, but they're listening, he added. Because they can't disprove what you said. She leaned against the kitchen counter. That doesn't mean they'll change. No, he agreed. It just means we have time. Time was not comfortable. Time was watchful. Over the next days, questions were sent to her directly. Some were fair. Some were sharp. She answered all of them with the same patience she used with numbers. No ego. No defense at the cafe. Things stayed mostly the same, but she felt different moving through it. Not above it. Just aware that another world now existed alongside it. One afternoon, a coworker joked about her being quieter than usual. She smiled and said she was tired. That was true enough. Then came the message she hadn't expected. He asked her to come in person. Not to the cafe this time. Somewhere else, she stood outside the building longer than she meant to. The glass doors reflected her back at herself. Same clothes, same posture. Different weight in her chest. Inside the space was orderly and calm. Conversations stopped briefly as she walked past. Not rudely, just curiously, she sat at the table and placed her notebook down. She didn't speak until asked. When they began, the tension was clear. This was not about numbers anymore. It was about trust. She spoke carefully, choosing honesty over reassurance. She admitted what she didn't know, explained what she was certain about, drew lines between risk and reward. Then she waited. When the decision came, it wasn't dramatic. They agreed to revise the plan, scale back, test carefully. It was not a victory. It was progress. Afterward, as she prepared to leave, one of the people she had never met before stopped her. You see things others miss, they said. Not warmly, not coldly, just fact. She nodded. That's my job, she replied, surprising herself. The words stayed with her. Later that evening, he asked her the question again. What would it take for this to be official? She thought about her shifts, her exhaustion, the way her life had been shaped by waiting for permission. I want to learn openly, she said. And I want accountability. If I'm wrong, I want to fix it, not hide it. Didn't answer right away. Days passed. During that time, doubt returned stronger. The cafe felt smaller. The future felt too large. Then the offer arrived. Simple, clear, a role with expectations and limits. Not a favor. Not charity. She read it slowly. She accepted. On her last full shift at the cafe, she worked with the same care as always. She thanked people, cleaned her section, folded her apron at the end as she stepped outside. The sky was turning dark, the way it does before a change in weather. She did not know exactly where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not stay silent again. Her first day did not start with speeches or applause. It started with an email calendar invite and a desk that still smelled faintly of new wood. The room felt quiet in a different way than the cafe. Softer, more alert. Every sound had a purpose. She arrived early. Habit. She placed her notebook on the desk and sat still for a moment, hands resting on the surface, breathing slowly. This was not a reward. It was work. That thought steadied her. People came in throughout the morning. Some greeted her warmly. Some nodded once and moved on. A few looked unsure what to make of her. She recognized that look. It was the look of people adjusting their expectations. Her responsibilities were clear from the start. Review, question, explain, not decide alone but inform decisions. It was exactly what she had asked for. The first meeting tested that promise. A familiar project returned, revised, but still fragile. Eyes turned toward her, waiting. She spoke when it mattered. She stayed quiet when it didn't. When someone pushed for speed, she asked about consequences. When someone defended a shortcut, she asked what happened if it failed. At lunch, she did not join the group. She walked outside and ate alone, thinking about the rhythm of this new place. It reminded her of numbers. Structured, but alive. Weeks passed. Mistakes surfaced, as they always do. Some small, some costly. When they happened, she did not hide them. She named them, explained why they happened, and how to prevent them next time. People noticed trust grew not because she was always right, but because she was always honest. One afternoon, an old message popped up on her phone. A photo from the cafe, a coffee cup, sunlight on a wooden table. The memory made her smile. She visited the cafe one evening after work, not as staff, just as a customer. The place looked the same soft music, the same calm hum. Someone else now wiped the tables. She ordered coffee and sat near the window. For a moment, she watched people come and go, each carrying stories no one asked about. She wondered how many hidden talents sat quietly behind counters, desks, uniforms. Back at work, her voice carried more weight now. Not because it was louder, but because it had proven steady. During a review, someone asked her what had shaped her thinking the most. She answered without preparing. Working without room to fail, she said. It teaches you to be careful. The room fell quiet. Later, he thanked her for that honesty. You changed how this place thinks, he said. She shook her head. I didn't, she replied. I just pointed out what was already there. Toward the end of the quarter, a report came back with clear results. Losses avoided. Plans improved. People relieved. No one joked about money that day. Recognition came eventually, but quietly. More responsibility. More questions aimed her way. A seat that no longer felt temporary. One evening, as the office emptied, she stayed behind to finish notes. Outside, city lights reflected softly in the glass. She thought back to that first moment. The joke. The pause. The decision to speak so many times. She had stayed silent before. Not because she lacked words, because she lacked permission. She understood now that permission was something people often waited for when they shouldn't. As she packed her bag, her phone buzzed. A short message from someone new, asking if she had time to look at a problem everyone else had missed. She replied simply, yes, on her way out. She paused by the door and looked back at the empty room. No banners. No trophies. Just desks and quiet proof. Her life had not changed overnight. It had changed carefully, the way numbers do when they finally add up. Outside, the air was cool. She walked forward without rushing. A simple joke had uncovered something. It's powerful, not because it was clever, but because she chose to answer it. The weeks after everything settled were not quiet, but they were steady. That was new for her. Before, life had been loud with worry, even when nothing happened. Now the noise came from work itself, from questions that mattered, from choices that carried weight. She learned quickly that progress does not feel like celebration. It feels like responsibility waking you up at odd hours. It feels like reading the same page twice, because you know. A small mistake can become a big one later. Her days filled with meetings, notes, emails, and long pauses where she stared at numbers that refused to sit still. Some days she left the office confident. Other days she walked home wondering if she had missed something important. She kept her old notebook close. Not because she needed it, because it reminded her where her habits came from. Caution, curiosity, patience. One afternoon, a new project landed on her desk. Larger than most. More visible. The kind people liked because it looked impressive from far away. She read it once, then again something felt familiar in the wrong way. The structure was clean. The presentation was strong. But deep inside, the assumptions leaned too heavily on optimism. She had seen this before. Confidence dressed up as certainty. She prepared her notes carefully and joined the discussion. This time there were more voices, more opinions. Some agreed with her questions. Others pushed back, gently but firmly. At one point, someone said, "We can't slow everything down just because of what might go wrong." She waited, then spoke. "I'm not asking to slow down," she said. "I'm asking to see clearly." That line stayed in the room longer than she expected. After the meeting, she felt drained. She wondered quietly if this was the part of growth people never talked about. The part where you start disappointing people by being honest. That evening, she sat by the window at home, watching lights come on across the street. She thought about the cafe again, about how simple things felt then. Even when money was tight, she missed the simplicity sometimes. The next day, the disagreement followed her into another meeting. The same project, the same tension. This time, pushback was stronger. She noticed how quickly certainty turned into defense when questioned. During a break, someone pulled her aside. "You're making people uncomfortable," they said, not unkindly. She nodded. "I know." "You don't have to challenge everything," they added. She answered honestly. "I don't challenge everything. Only what could hurt people later." The conversation ended without a clear answer. That night, she struggled to sleep. Doubt crept in. The old doubt. The doubt that asks if being quiet would be easier. She opened her notebook and wrote one sentence. "Comfort is expensive." It calmed her. Days later, data arrived that shifted the conversation. Market movement. Cost changes. Early signs of strain. The same people who had pushed back now asked her to walk them through her concerns again. She did. Without bitterness, the project adjusted course. No one apologized. She didn't expect them to. What mattered was that it worked. As time passed, newer team members began coming to her first. Not for approval, but for clarity. She answered them the same way she always did. Slowly. Honestly. One afternoon, she noticed a familiar pattern in one of their early drafts. A small error. One that looked harmless? She smiled. Some habits took time to spread. Outside of work, her life changed in quieter ways. She slept better. She planned ahead. She allowed herself rest without guilt. She still visited the cafe sometimes. The staff greeted her warmly. Nothing had changed there, and yet everything had. Sitting with a cup of coffee one evening, she overheard a conversation at the next table. Someone joked about money, about numbers being confusing, about how mistakes were unavoidable. She listened without interrupting. Not every moment needed correction. What mattered was knowing when to speak. Back at work, recognition came in subtle forms. Being included earlier, asked last for final thoughts. Trusted with uncertainty. During one review, she was asked how she handled pressure. She thought for a moment. By remembering what happens when no one does, she said. The answer felt simple. Earned later that week, she received a message from someone outside the company. A referral. Someone had mentioned her name. She felt the weight of that. Being seen meant being responsible in new ways. She agreed to the conversation. The call was brief but respectful. More listening than talking. When it ended, she sat quietly for a long time. Her world was still expanding, slowly, carefully. One evening, as she prepared to leave work, she noticed the same quiet she had felt on her first day. Not emptiness. Balance. She packed her bag and walked out into the night. The road ahead was not simple. It never would be, but she no longer mistook. Silence for safety. She knew now that the smallest moments often decide the longest paths, and she was ready to keep walking. One clear step at a time, change rarely announces itself. Most of the time, it arrives disguised as pressure. She felt that clearly now. The questions grew heavier, the pauses longer. People were no longer asking if she had insight. They were asking if she could carry weight. The project that followed was the biggest so far. Not just in size, but in visibility. Many eyes on it, too many opinions circling it. The kind of situation where mistakes did not fade quietly. They stayed. She received the files late one evening. At home, she made tea and did not touch them right away. She had learned that rushing brought false confidence. She waited until her mind felt still, when she finally opened the documents. She understood at once why they had been sent to her. The structure was ambitious. Fast growth, high expectations. On paper, it promised success. But in the margins between the neat lines, she saw risks stacking up like unstable bricks. Everyone else saw opportunity. She saw timing. She spent the entire weekend working through scenarios. What if rates shifted? What if supply slowed? What if assumptions arrived late instead of early? By Sunday night, her notes were full. On Monday morning, she walked into the office already tired but clear. The meeting room felt tight, as if all the air had been taken by confidence. People spoke with excitement. The energy was strong, almost convincing. When her turn came, she didn't speak right away. She opened her notebook and chose her words with care. "This can work," she said calmly, "but not the way it's planned." The room stilled. She explained where momentum became danger, how speed without buffers turned small delays into large costs. She didn't accuse. She described. Some listened. Others crossed their arms. One voice cut in. "You're imagining problems," it said. "We've survived worse." She met the comment without raising hers. "Surviving isn't the same as succeeding," she replied. Silence followed. After the meeting, reactions split. Some thanked her quietly. Others avoided her. She felt the isolation later that afternoon when the office buzzed around her, but no one stopped by her desk. It reminded her of old days, being present but unseen. That night, doubt returned sharper than before. She stood by her window, looking down at the street. Cars moved steadily, each driver convinced they were headed somewhere important. She asked herself the hardest question. What if she was wrong? She sat down and checked her work again. Slowly, carefully, she found no shortcuts. No assumptions she hadn't tested that didn't erase the doubt, but it steadied it. The next morning, an update arrived. A key supplier had delayed delivery. Small delay, just enough to matter. The room shifted. Suddenly, her concerns sounded less cautious and more necessary. Meetings followed. Conversations deepened. Adjustments were made. Not all at once, but enough. One afternoon, she was asked to explain her thinking to a smaller group. No charts, no slides. Just words, she spoke plainly, about cause and effect. about people further down the line who absorbed mistakes they didn't create. She saw something change then. Attention without defense. Later that week, she overheard someone repeating her words in another discussion. Not crediting her, just using the idea. She smiled to herself. Ideas mattered more than names. At the cafe that weekend, she sat quietly with a cup of coffee and listened to conversations float around. Her complaints, plans, small dreams. She noticed how easily people dismiss their own insight. Someone else will notice, they often said. She had once believed that too, back at work. The project moved forward on the revised path. Slower, safer. When early results came in, they held nothing extraordinary happened. And that was the point. One evening, long after most people had gone home, she stayed late, finishing notes. Someone stopped at her desk. "You're harder to argue with than you look," they said, smiling. She returned the smile. "That's usually how it works," she replied. The remark stayed with her for days. Her name began circulating outside her department. Quiet mentions. Casual references. She didn't chase it. She focused on the work. Then came the message she hadn't expected. A request to talk? Not about a project. About direction. When they met, the tone was different. More serious? Less guarded. "We're growing," she was told. "And growth makes blind spots." She listened. "We need someone who isn't impressed by speed," the voice continued. "Someone who slows us down before it hurts." She understood the weight beneath the words. She asked one question. "Will I be allowed to disagree openly?" Yes. Even so, she didn't answer right away that night. She thought about her early days. Long shifts. Quiet observation. Learning alone, she thought about the choice she had made the day of the joke. To speak, growth hadn't come from brilliance alone. It had come from endurance. She accepted the responsibility, not because it made her feel important, but because the work needed it. The next weeks tested her again. More rooms. More resistance. More trust placed carefully, step by step. Not everyone liked her role. She stayed steady. Late one evening, walking home under dim streetlights, she realized something had changed inside. She was no longer waiting to be noticed. She was choosing to see, and she knew now that was enough to reshape not just numbers, but futures. The pressure did not arrive all at once. It came in small changes. Shorter deadlines, bigger rooms, fewer second chances. It felt heavier because it was quieter. No one warned her. No one needed to. She was now part of decisions that could not be undone easily. When plans failed before, they failed in small circles. Now, failure would echo wider. She felt that weight every morning before she left home. The situation that tested her most began like all the others. Confident slides, clean data, strong words. Everything looked right. That alone made her uneasy. She had learned that real work usually carried a few rough edges. She reviewed the proposal slowly, line by line. The numbers were solid, the structure logical. Still, something pressed at the back of her mind. Not an error. An absence? She found it late at night. A missing scenario. The plan assumed stability during a fragile period. Not impossible, just risky. There was no backup if circumstances shifted quickly. She wrote a note and stared at it for a long time. Bringing it up would delay everything. It would frustrate people who were already tired of caution. She closed her laptop and sat still. This was the moment she had been warning others about. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just a quiet choice between comfort and responsibility. The next morning she spoke. She did not present it as a problem. She presented it as a question. What happens if momentum breaks before recovery begins? The room paused. Someone answered quickly. That won't happen. She nodded. Probably, she said. But if it does... Eyes moved away from her. Pens stopped tapping. Another voice cleared its throat. We can't plan for every possibility. No, she agreed. just the ones that could hurt the most. The discussion grew tense. Not loud, but sharp. People defended the timeline, the opportunity, the need to move fast before interest faded. She listened. Then she said the thing that made the room go still. "If this fails," she said calmly, "it won't fail on paper. It will fail on people who trusted us." That landed harder than charts ever did. The meeting ended without resolution. Over the next days, the temperature dropped. Conversations became polite but distant. Decisions happened in smaller circles. She felt the shift. Her doubt returned heavier this time. Not the old doubt about worth. This was doubt about timing. Had she waited too long to speak elsewhere? Late one night, she walked through the empty office floor. Lights dimmed. Desks quiet. She thought about how easy it would be to stop pushing, to let momentum carry things forward. She also thought about the people. It's affected if everything went wrong. The choice stayed the same. A few mornings later, news broke that shook the room. External conditions changed overnight. Fast. Exactly the way the missing scenario described. Phones buzzed. Meetings were called. Voices tightened. The project paused, not canceled. Paused. She sat in one of the meetings, listening as urgency replaced confidence. People searched for explanations. For options, she spoke only when needed. "We plan for this now," she said, "while we still can." No one argued. The work that followed was intense. Long hours. Hard decisions. Scaling down. Reworking commitments. Not everyone was happy, but the loss was contained. The damage limited. When it ended, when the tension finally released, there was no celebration. Only relief. Later that evening, she sat alone at her desk, staring at a blank page. Exhaustion pressed against her eyelids. She thought about the cafe again. About how quiet mistakes once felt. How small. Now she knew better. The next week, something unexpected happened. Someone apologized. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just a quiet acknowledgement. "I didn't see it," they said. "You did?" She nodded. "Next time, someone else will," she replied. That mattered more than credit. Soon after, she was asked to share her thinking with a broader group. Not to teach formulas. To explain judgment. She stood in front of the room and spoke simply. "Speed is attractive," she said, "but clarity lasts longer." She told them about the cafe without naming it. About how learning comes from watching closely. About how curiosity long ignored becomes strength. People listened. Afterward, a few stayed behind to ask questions. Honest ones. Personal ones. She answered them patiently. Outside of work, she felt herself changing too. She stood straighter. Not from pride, but from ease. She trusted her instincts more. She still doubted. But doubt no longer stopped her. One evening, she returned to the cafe and sat near the window. A new waitress moved through the space. Learning the rhythm, she watched quietly. When a customer hesitated over a bill, joking about numbers, she smiled to herself. Some moments repeat, but not everyone notices them. As she finished her coffee, she understood something clearly for the first time. Her story was never about money. It was about tension, and she would keep giving it wherever she stood.